Hello everyone, I'm Amir Noughaby. I'm a PhD candidate in mechanical engineering at École Polytechnique, University of Montreal. Today I'm going to present an overview of the neurophysiology of human postural control, and but not in details and in simple words. Before continuing and explaining different parts of the postural control in terms of its neurophysiology inherence, it's good to just have a recap of the human postural control and its different collaborations between the different systems. We know that the human body is inherently unstable because we assume it as a single inverted pendulum pivot around the ankle that is inherently unstable. Some internal disturbances like heartbeat and respiration, or external disturbances like gravitational forces or pulling and pushing forces, make body deviate from its upright position. But this deviation can be sensed by some different sensory systems, including vision, vestibular, and proprioception. And each of these sensory systems have their own perception of this deviation and from the upright posture. And to contract these destabilizing factors, we need to have a corrective ankle torque applied to the ankle joint, and actually this ankle torque has two sources: this intrinsic source of this torque and the active part of the torque. And for the intrinsic torque is actually the intrinsic stiffness, that is the inherence of the joint, inherent resistance of the joint to deviation and movement that cause this intrinsic torque. And the active torque is itself is combining from two parts: reflex torque and central torque. And the reflex torque is generated by SRH reflex stiffness that goes with some short delay to generate the EMGs, and after that it's applied to the muscle dynamics to produce the reflex torque. And the other part of the active torque is the central torque, that we have the sensory feedback. In fact, the central nervous system receives this sensory feedback, and according to this information and processing them, the CNS produce its perception from the body deviation to generate the motor command for the muscle dynamics. And in fact, it has a longer delay compared to the SRH reflex part. But we said that the plant that we are going to control during the postural control is the body, and in simple schematic we consider it as a single inverted pendulum. That is the ankle standing strategy to explain the postural control. In fact, if the body of support, that is the surface that the body has contact with the environment, is big and the perturbation is small, we can consider the corrective strategies to keep the balance as the ankle standing strategy, that is just a single inverted pendulum. But in case of having a small base of support or larger perturbation, we assume that the ankle strategy cannot cannot cope these destabilizing factors, and we need to incorporate other parts of the body and make the body dynamics more complex. And we say this strategy as the hip standing strategy. We know that ankle joint among all of the parts of the body has the most important part of the most important joint because it transmit the grand reaction forces from the surface to the lower limbs of the body, and also the body deviate from about the ankle joint. Also, there are some other protective strategies that in case of failure of the corrective strategies, we use them. The first one is stepping and the second one grasping, but they are not in our scope of this presentation. And the other sensory systems participating in the postural control are sensory systems, including vision, vestibular, and proprioception or somatosensory. For the vision, visual sensory system provides information about the body orientation of movement with respect to the environment. When a light hits the eye, it is received by the very back layer cells of the eye called retina. You can see here as the light is coming into the eye, and it's received by the retina. That is the back cells of the eye. Then, after some process, these the sensory receptors of the eye, called the photoreceptors, receive this light and generate the visual signals that goes through the optic nerve. And after passing the optic nerve, this signal reached the point that we call it optic chiasm, that in this part, the closer nerves to the nose, to the nose goes to the other side of the body. I mean, for example, if a light reaches the right eye, the signal will go to the left side of the brain. And after passing the optic chiasm, we have the signals in the optic tract that is a part of the central nervous system. And after passing the thalamus, we reach the visual cortex that is sensing the visual signals. But for the vestibular system that provides information regarding the linear and rotational movement and velocities of the head and human body, the main part of the vestibular is the inner ear. And in the inner ear, we have a part, actually we have two parts, the vestibular labyrinth and cochlea. The cochlea is related to the auditory system, but the vestibular labyrinth is related to the vestibular system. Actually, it has three different semicircular canals that each of which sense the rotation of the body in each plane in the space. And there is a fluid moving in each of these tubes that names endolymph, that after movement they goes to the part of the vestibular labyrinth called ampulla, and this ampulla has some parts. First, the sensory receptors called hair cells. At the top of the hair cells, we have the cilia, that when the endolymph is moving, it's generating some movement in the hair of these hair cells and providing information that we have a movement in this direction in this plane. But and after that, after moving the cilia, we have some actually the neurotransmitters are releasing and goes to the brain. And another part of the vestibular system is the otolith organs that senses the forward and backward movements and gravitational force. it itself includes two parts, auricle and saccule. That auricle senses the horizontal movement and saccule senses the vertical movement. Again, the hair cells senses this movement through movements of some crystals of calcium carbonates that called autoconia. The other part of the sensory system is called somatosensory, that is including two parts, tactile and proprioception. Receptors, there are a lot of receptors for the somatosensory that are distributed in the whole of the body, in the joint, muscle, and screens. And you can see here, we have some receptors for the somatosensory. The first one is the muscle spindles that is connected actually in the belly of the muscle, and it is monitoring the muscle length and velocity. The other part of the receptors of the somatosensory are named cutaneous, that is not shown here, but for example, under skin, when you touch something, these receptors sense the information that you are interacting with the environment. And the third receptors of the somatosensory are called Golgi tendon organ, that is you see here, that are located at the junction of the muscle and the tendon, and they monitor the active tension in the muscle. But the nervous system is itself including two parts, the central nervous system, or CNS, and peripheral nervous system. You can see here that the central nervous system is itself including two parts, brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system has two parts, and the somatic, that is assigned to voluntary movement, and autonomic, that is assigned to the involuntary movement. For the brain itself, it has some parts: cerebral cortex, brainstem, cerebellum, and basal ganglia. The first part is a spinal cord. The spinal cord, you can see here some pictures from that representing its shape. You can see here that is connected to the actually to the brain. For the CNS, this is a cross-sectional view of the spinal cord, and you can see here that actually the sensory neurons are connected to the dorsal rootlets, that they themselves generate the dorsal root, that they are emerging in that part, and finally after a bunch of dorsal roots created the dorsal root ganglion. And the other part of the that is connected to the spinal cord is the motor neurons, because you know there are two pathways connected to the spinal cord: the sensory pathway and the motor pathway. For the motor pathway, again, we have some ventral rootlets that is connected to the spinal cord, and the combination of them create the ventral root. The other part of the central nervous system is the cerebral cortex, that is the outer most layer of the brain, that it's a gray matter, and it has foldings including some gyri and sulci. Actually, the gyri are the the regions in the cerebral cortex, and the sulci are the grooves that we see here in this picture. It has some components. Each part of the cerebral cortex is performing some task. For some part of it is connected to the sensory areas, and it itself has some parts of primary somatosensory cortex, visual cortex, and auditory cortex, and also other parts of sensory systems that are not shown here. The motor areas, you can see that has some other parts, and also the association areas that are related to some conscious and non-conscious activities that you can see here. Another part of the CNS is called thalamus, that working as a relay between sensory and motor systems, and the cerebral cortex. It decided which pathway is working at that time, and that's it. You can see just the orange part of this picture is the thalamus, and the brainstem. Actually, it's a stalk that is connecting the spinal cord to the brain, and it has some upward and downward pathways that carry sensory and motor information to other parts of the central nervous system. It includes three parts: medulla, pons, and midbrain. The medulla is essential for the cerebral tasks like breathing and other parts of the other actions like reflexive actions such as vomiting and coughing. The pons part is related to the sensation of the head and face, and also motor movement of the eyes and mouth, and also it's working for the equilibrium. And the third part of the brainstem is the midbrain, that is related to the eye movement and visual processing, and also auditory processing. So we can say that the pons and midbrain are related to the postural control. And this, another part of CNS called is cerebellum, that's working for the coordinating the gait, maintaining the posture, controlling muscle tone and voluntary activity of the muscle, but it's unable to initiate muscle contractions. And the cerebellum is this yellow part of the brain that is under the under the gray matter. It has two hemispheres actually, and it has some parts. The first part is the cerebellum, that's working as the receiving input from the cerebral cortex, and it's involved in the planning and initiating movements. The other part is the spinal cerebellum, to receive information from the limb position and pressure sensation, and also modifying motor signals. And this, also the vermis is the other part of the spinal cerebellum. And the third part of the cerebellum is the vestibular cerebellum, that is important for the balance and posture. The last one is the basal ganglia, that's important to facilitate the movement, and but we know that it's not directly dependent to the spinal cord. It receives just primary information from the cerebral cortex, and it sends output to the brainstem. But in the literature, we don't know how exactly the basal ganglia works. We talked about about the human body, and we said that the ankle plays an important role in keeping the standing balance. We know that it's a synovial joint that is located in the lower limb and connecting the foot and leg, and also it transmits the ground reaction forces to the body. You can see here ankle joint that consists from 3 joints and provides 3 different degree of freedoms movement in 3 planes. And also it has some muscles that's contributing to the movement of the ankle. The first one is tibialis anterior, the next one is medial gastrocnemius, lateral gastrocnemius, and soleus. And we know that between each muscle and the spinal cord, there are 2 pathways. The first one is the motor neuron pathway, and the second one is the sensory pathways. That each is stretching in the intrafusal fiber. Actually, provides some information for the spinal cord, and consequently, it generates some motor activation for the extrafusal fiber to contract this movement. And For the ankle joint, we know that there is a dynamic relation between the joint angle and the torque acting about it. And the stiffness of the ankle joint provides a measure of the resistance of the joint to that motion before that the voluntary intervention is appearing. And we know that it has two parts, intrinsic stiffness and reflex stiffness. Sorry, that's not correct. And for the intrinsic stiffness, it's actually the inherent mechanical resistance to movement that is generated by some parts of passive viscoelastic properties, connective tissues and joints, and inertial properties of the limb, that there is no delay in the action of the intrinsic stiffness, and we know that there is no muscle activation here. And the second part of the joint stiffness is stretch reflex, that when a muscle is stretching, muscle spindles are also stretched, and it causes to excite their afferents, and then depolarizes the synapse to alpha motor neurons of the same muscle in the spine, and consequently it generates activity in the muscle. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for your presentation, Amir. Is there any question from team members?
Go ahead. Okay. Thank you, Amir, for your presentation. It was very interesting. I had a question about the body dynamics that you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation. You said that, yeah, exactly. You said that it was an inverted pendulum, but it's only when it's in, like, for instance, during the gait, it's only when it's in stance phase, not swing phase.
Sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
I said that the inverted pendulum modeling of the human body is good for only during the gait when it's in stance phase. Like in swing phase, it's not the inverted pendulum. That's right.
Yeah. Actually, during the gait, we have also the inverted pendulum, but with some constraints. Because
sorry, Amir, before going into other aspect of basically what Amandine asked, you should directly answer her question, and her question was clear, I guess, and it corresponds to what you presented today, right? So what Amandine is asking is that, so we have different phases of human gait. One of them is stance, and in stance, the inverted pendulum body dynamic is valid. For the other part is not. Is that true? And what is the relationship between this question and what you presented today?
Yeah.
What is the title of your presentation?
The neurophysiology of the postural control. That is related to the posture and balanced standing.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
Okay. But for the, in my opinion, the inverted pendulum is also valid for the gait in other parts of the, not for the running, but for the gait, because in the running, sometimes we have no contact between the human body and the limbs and the surface, but when we are in the gait, for example, in different phases like stance phases or other phase, I don't remember its name.
Swing phase.
Swing, yeah, the swing phase. Yeah, the swing phase. Also, it is also a inverted pendulum, but in a more complex model, in my opinion, because, for example, and actually in the for the stance phase, it's also a more complex model than what we have in the balance control. Because when we consider the body dynamics in the balance control, in the standing balance, the two legs are close to each other. So if we look at the body from one side, from the sagittal plane to the body model, two legs are in the same direction. But when we are in the stance phase of the gait, they are far from each other, but with some, constraints. We can model it as an inverted pendulum.
And if we just consider like the ankle, like without considering the rest of the body, during the swing phase, if we take like the knee as a fixed joint, the ankle is like a pendulum. That's right?
Exactly.
And also I have another question. It was about when you talked about the proprioception in muscles, tendons and other this kind of things. I was wondering if the process for tendons is the same for ligaments.
For the ligament, I'm not pretty sure. For the ligament.
Do you know what kind of receptor? Is there any receptors in there? Or?
I don't know. If I say something, it will be not accurate.
Thank you.
So Amandine, can you explain to us maybe your question a little bit further? What exactly are you referring to as ligament?
In fact,
the tendon.
The tendon is between a muscle and a bone, but the ligament is between two bones. So I was wondering, I think it's kind of the same structure. It's with collagen cells, I think, but it's kind of a bit different in the structure, but they are similar. So I was wondering if there were this kind of receptors in ligaments. And also I was wondering if there are also other receptors in organs, like in other structures of the human body, or if it's just for muscle and skin or tendons.
Can I
you want to say something? Yeah.
I believe that there are receptors in the ligament as well. They're like I don't exactly. I'm not sure there are a lot of receptors in the body, like receptors that are detecting displacement, velocity, temperature. There are different receptors in the ligaments as well. But I guess it would make sense if they are sensors for displacement as well, because like elasticity is something which is important in ligaments, I guess. But I believe that it's not a tissue which has no receptors, just a passive tissue. Of course, it should have some.
Yeah, but are they related to the somatosensory?
Yeah, it's what I was wondering.
I'm not sure.
That's a great question, actually.
So another question is that what is the relationship between this question to postural control? Do we have ligaments who contribute to postural control? Like Amir explained it nicely that we have ankle joint, which is really prevalent in maintaining the balance. Then with the other strategies that Amir explained, we have knees and hip and other things. What can be basically acting on human postural control from the ligaments?
I think perhaps the internal motion in the joint between the different bones. Yeah.
Like the knee, for example.
Yeah, or even the ankle, I think, or the foot.
Yeah.
And it actually shows its importance when we are in the stance phase, I think, because, for example, when we are in the swing phase, less muscles are contributing to the, for example, knee movement. But when we are in the stance phase, the ligaments are contributing to the movement, but I'm not pretty sure that how they are working.
Sorry if I can jump in again. I'm sorry, but I know a couple of researchers, especially Eric Prelot he was actually Rob Kearney's one of his early students. He's in Northwestern, and he exactly works on internal joint biomechanics, and he's actually working on the similar thing, which Rick Lab is doing, but they're also interested in the internal joint dynamics. For example, for the shoulder, the situation is very complex compared with the ankle. So they do take into the account the internal joint mechanics, because the effect that is, it makes the plant more complicated. So there must be some use.
That's valid in terms of biomechanics of the joints and ligaments and everything. But Amandin's question was more towards sensing it, towards capturing whatever it is that contributes to the somatosensory or the proprioception system. So one answer: have you ever gotten injured in sport, like
Yes.
related to this ligaments and everything? So after the injury, did you have sensation on the position of the joint or not?
I'm not sure. I think that we lost sensations when we are injured.
Exactly. So that's one of the indicators, right? So it happens, for example, in soccer, that happens a lot, that sometimes these injuries will make the player lose the sense, if they don't lose the sense of their own joint. Like, for example, the ankle joint, sometimes the knee, it's misaligned and it's not easily identifiable by the player. So there must be something there. So I think Ali has another question.
Sorry, do you mean that they lose the relative, the relative sense perception of between the.
Yeah. So maybe I explained it not with good terms, so not sensation, but mostly proprioception.
Okay.
Well, that's the thing. Yes, Ali.
Yes, I have a question, a really general question. So, if I'm not mistaken, could you bring the second slide, Amir, please?
This one?
Yeah. So if I'm not, I think this entire view, this entire approach is just seeing the system as a feedback control system. But maybe I'm mistaken, but we know that the motor control it's a hierarchical control system, because it has feed forward system, it has internal models. Like there are, for example, for gait or even for simple movements of the arm, there are pre-designed motor patterns that are deployed whenever you want to execute them. So people discovered that there is a specific pattern for taking your hand, like the end effector of your hand, to your mouth. This has a pre-designed input motor sequence. So whenever you want to do that, I don't know which part of the brain that is, maybe it's the brainstem, it just deploys that sequence like feed forward, and then you just do that. But then you adjust for errors using some brainstem, which is modulating the movement. So when we're looking at it like this, are we just looking at it as a simple feedback loop? Are we not missing all these other layers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is just a simple model to to simplify the relation between sensory systems, central nervous system, and other parts of incorporating in the human postural control. But and actually, it's a model according to what to those signals that we have access. We have access in them. For example, for the thing that you mentioned, that probably we may need EEG signals and have access to some inner layers of the brain and other parts of the body, but because we know that already we have no access, at least for our project, so this model is valid, I think.
So what Ali was asking here was not directly related to your project, because your presentation was more of a general understanding of the neurophysiology of human postural control. He was asking, is it a good approximation of the system to consider it as such a feedback system, a closed loop feedback system like this that you showed, or there are other modalities like a feed-forward system, like an error that is generated between calculation of a feed-forward system and what's we're getting from a feedback.
Yeah, no, there is a long history in the back of this problem, because firstly, people assume that just passive controller, I mean the intrinsic stiffness, produce the torque needed for the ankle torque. Then they realize that it's only not enough for the for this task, and they include other parts like social flex. Then they realize that central nervous system is also acting and plays an important role in this model. So yeah, there are some feed-forward models that people have developed and added some other components to it. I mean, and I think this is the last and the most important model, simplified model from the human postural control.